All right, so welcome to the Both And podcast. It's been a minute
And a couple years.
and a couple of years since we last had conversations together. Um, and so we
On
wanted to,
air.
on air, right? We've clearly
Let's
been having
clarify.
many conversations over the last few years, but we wanted to start some conversations um, around, the state of things in a broad sense, mental health, gender and equity issues, and anything else that might come to our minds. Anything else that you would frame it with? This new version?
No, I think that's good, but I appreciate that last week we said, "And anything else that comes up in the world," because that really worked out for us given that a
There are
lot has
some
come up
things
in the last
happening.
week. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So we made a
Mm-hmm.
good call there. That was good.
Yeah, it's topical, is what it is. It's very
Yes.
topical.
Yes.
So what is going on in your world?
Ugh. Be more specific. My personal world or my personal relation to the larger world?
Yeah, that one.
That one. Okay. Oh my goodness. I mean, I've had like a totally different perspective on this situation because of the media that I'm filtering myself to.
Okay.
So,
What media are you filtering yourself to?
well, a friend of ours, Laura, sent me a um, local independent, local to Minnesota. She's in Minneapolis right now.
Right, yeah.
And so she sent me an independent Unicorn Riot
Yep.
media, and I've been just following them, and it's been so different for me than any other. Like I remember 9/11, what that was like going through that process. Granted, I was a lot younger and making a lot less choices, I think, and especially like intentional
Sure.
choices through that, but it's just been so different. I actually tuned into just sort of some local, NBC news, and I thought for a second maybe I tuned into Anchorman or something. I didn't know what was happening. Like
Yeah.
it was such a contrast.
Yeah,
I
no, that
couldn't
sounds
I
right.
couldn't wrap my mind around it. But I've learned so much in just watching the footage. Just like being there with the people that's what I want to do. That's how I want to experience what's happening. And so I've found that that has been the closest way to do that. Um, and also in very fortunate and stressful ways, like Laura's kids go to daycare a couple of blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. So, like, there's been a lot, there's helicopters in their neighborhood. Like, they
Right.
have neighborhood watch for 2 hours that they trade out, like, gunshots. It's been literally a war zone. And so that has been like personally challenging for me and also so helpful in my greater experience of all of this because I'm able to understand what it's like for people who are experiencing it because I have the benefit of being in the middle of a riot on my computer
Right. Yeah,
from the
it's a very
safety of my
very
home.
different experience.
Yes. And so to then I suppose what's happening is like she and her family are also kind of filling in some of the other more intimate parts of the experience
Right.
and creating this larger picture for me that I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are missing out on.
Mhm.
There's been
Mhm.
so much hope, so many amazing stories and people, and I feel like I've met all of these amazing people on Lake Street, and
Right.
I've been waiting for the last, half a year to go and be able to visit them. And so she texted me at like midnight or something and said, "If you're still watching, welcome to our neighborhood. This is not how I pictured showing it to you, but here we are." And it's just been interesting because I feel connected to it in a way that I wouldn't otherwise if it were happening in so many other places in the country. But
Right.
because I know that I'll be able to go and support those businesses, not just from afar, but in person someday, like that just to me is like, oh, that will be amazing, to get to that moment.
Yeah. uh I mean, to have that sort of close connection, right? The the personal knowledge of someone who is sitting right there, it feels different, much in the same way that I was very aware of school shootings, but until my children were at a school where there was a shooting, like I did not have the same level of connection and understanding for what that was like. And so having a direct connection to folks who are sort of in that moment as much as possible. Have you gone downtown over the last week or so? Downtown Denver?
I have not been downtown. My friend Whitfield has been going down every day. Natalie has been going down. She's actually been organizing a lot of different things, making eye wash, doing, you know, emergency supply coordination, that kind of thing.
Right.
Um, and that's been really hard for me. Like Laura and I also have been talking a lot about and grappling with just a lot of the different things that this brings up for our experience and how we choose to engage.
Yeah.
And I think it would be really awesome if we could have Laura and others talk about their experience as well. But just my interpretation of sort of how things have been um, playing out for her is that I am wanting to support this and I believe in this thing. And also, I'm a mother of two small children. And so, at what point am I sacrificing? Like there's a lot to grapple with. And I think social
Right.
media is making it very, very oversimplified and overcomplicated all at the same time.
What do you
And
mean by that?
I think that we're oversimplifying things like, for example, Blackout Tuesday. And I mean, that really exemplified how quickly something can take off on the internet and can go from having one kind of intention to another in a game of telephone, as it were,
Yeah.
because it was actually contributing more to the problems. And the way that I have sort of viewed all of the things that are happening is that if like I can tell pretty much in the first sentence or two when people talk about this situation where they're at on their journey of privilege and racism and where they're sort of tuned in to what's happening right now in real time, because the things that they say or believe are very much connected to the source they're getting it from, or to your point earlier, the level of direct empathy that they are feeling for the situation. So I think that it simplifies things in some ways and allows people to just sort of, oh, I did the thing, I'm good, like check. we're
Right.
we're just doing socially conscious now. It's cool to not be racist now. Like it's very, very frustrating for those, and I say those of us, meaning, and I am like 2 years into this journey, so like I don't even claim to be part of this, and it's still frustrating to me to have people all of a sudden like, you can't bandwagon anti-racism, that's just wrong. It's just wrong. Just don't do it. So I think that's why it's like complicated and not. Um, but there's so much happening right now on the internet of like, this is what you should do and you shouldn't do, and the assumptions that are being made about how people engage. And so anyway, all of that is to say it's been really hard for me to decide because I've wanted to be downtown. I
Hmm.
have wanted to participate and engage. And I also know that based on the own trauma recovery that I'm going through and all of the other things that are happening in my personal life, as well as how I'm additionally experiencing everything in the world and how it's impacting people who are very close to me, I had to really, really stop and recognize that there are multiple ways, or as I saw earlier today on social media, multiple lanes. And the thing that's not okay is to not pick one.
Mm.
Like, we don't need to shame people into saying this is the right lane and this is not. If your lane is creating art, then you should be creating art right now. And if your lane is reading books or listening to podcasts or watching the movies or doing any of the things, the point is pick a lane and get in it and go. But why do we have to decide what everybody's lane is.
Right.
And
And where they're
and
allowed to be or
right.
not.
And the validity of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. Hmm. I was telling you the other day that Kara's been listening to the When You Feed podcast. They rebroadcasted um, this woman who has um, essentially been doing anti-racist work with white people for a very long time, um, and talking about she realized that a few years ago she stopped doing work with early stage white people in the process. She was trying to sort of talk through where essentially everyone was in their progress, and um, so she talked through white fragility, and she talked through um, the way in which you react to very real events, right? Like it when you see a video of a black man being murdered, is do you make it about you? Like that is the biggest indicator of where you are on the process, right? If you make it about you, then you're very early on, and like how it makes you feel. Um, and so it's Austin Channing Brown is the
Oh yeah.
woman's name.
I love her.
Yeah,
She's
and
great work.
um, so it was just interesting to sort of see, but she was very much advocating for there is a way for white people for everyone um to react and to have an authentic reaction, but it doesn't mean, and she talks a lot about the workshops that she's running, um that the workshop doesn't stop when it doesn't stop when someone has a visceral reaction to something being said, right? You can't stop the conversation in order to deal with the person who is having very strong feelings, um, uh, about something that they are experiencing for the first time, but other people in the room have been dealing with it their whole lives, right? And so I do think that part, there have to be some people who do play that role of leading people who are early on in their process and their journey. Um, but for folks who are ready to move, for folks who are ready to have that next conversation, they can't let those early stage conversations hold back progress. And things like that. So I thought that was an interesting sort of lens to look through, um, where people are on their journey, right? So.
I've been thinking about that a lot, wanting sort of in the way that we have been doing work with learner profiles and portfolios. And I feel as though a lot of what we've been doing in the past few years with our work in education has been very identity focused
Mhm.
and focused on reflection and developing your own identity, and then developing your identity in community with others, how you then challenge your identity and your growth and all those things. And so I'm actually now seeing so many places where it it just seems very parallel to me. the
Mhm. Mhm.
the process, you can put technology and teachers into the process, or you can put privileged white people into the process, right? But like you can create that journey, that it's different for people, and how you engage in it should be different.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But what are those like milestones? What are the commonalities on that journey? And I also wonder, to your point about, someone has to do the work. I wonder about the importance of, in doing that work with those early learners, what is the responsibility that we have to then also build capacity so that we're not continuing to burden our people of color, our teachers and social justice leaders who have been leading this work for so, so long, for generations. That is a burden and a trauma that they have been enduring for far too long. And I think about how there have been these pockets of anti-racist work. There have been pockets of anti-racist educators becoming more vocal or seeking each other out. But at what point do we say, like, it's not just your responsibility to learn, it's your responsibility to learn and then teach someone else, to pay it forward. Like, how are you going to leave this? And we always say, like, you're leaving this workshop or you're leaving this session. What are you going to do immediately tomorrow with your kids in your classroom? It's like, what can I do tomorrow? Not what money can I start piling together and maybe remember to donate somewhere. Like, every single day, what am I going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. There was a really good example from the podcast earlier today of a woman who was working with a very well respected teacher from her hometown, and the teacher realized that she was subconsciously, whenever she was making seating charts, that she was not putting black kids together, um, and she realized it when she was going off of names, like to do, because she didn't know the kids yet, and so she put the kids together and realized, oh, I was going off of names in order to, because I think that they're going to talk more, or I think they're going to be disruptive if they're together, in a very subconscious way, right? um and so um so that realization, essentially what she was saying is that realization can take many forms, but when you have that realization, you have to act. You cannot, like, there is no alternative at that point to saying, well, I'm just going to keep doing this because it's easier. um she was talking a lot about the that diversity is way harder than like a monoculture. It's just harder, but the benefits are so real. The benefits are so, um they are so, vast and wide, and so um we can't stop. we when you have that moment. And I had a moment in DPS. I don't think you were there, but Laura was there, where we were doing a cross personalized learning kind of thing with Mario's team, the coaches, and those folks. And there was one black woman, one woman of color in sort of, uh, in in the same row that I was in, right? So did not have a line of sight because there were two other people who were in front of her, and so I could not, for the life of me, like, see that she wanted to speak at a couple of different points. And I was she felt like I was blowing her off. And she raised the point and was very clear, like, hey, are you not going to call on me? And I was like, oh my goodness, like, this is a huge issue. And I said, oh, I didn't see you at the end. And and she said, I get that. And then she called out the other two people who did, right? Like, they're right next to her, and she was like, but they did, and they also could help. um and when you say that you don't see me, that also is very hurtful. Right? Because it's very real and sort of clear, a clear moment where she was sort of vocalizing, like, you said that you don't see me, right? Like, that is you couldn't put it any more clearly. um and so that was, for me, not the first, but a very real representation of, I am in many ways not aware, like, I have a blinder on when I am teaching, when I am leading a group, to the differences within that group, even if they are observable, even if they are, unless I am consciously making the effort to change the way in which I'm interacting, to change where I'm sitting, to change the way in which, and we know all of these things, but in a very sort of quick moment and meeting and those kinds of things, like we don't do them for whatever reason. Um, and we go into sort of this default, like everything is going the way that it should. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. um and so that that realization of saying, uh the realization that you have to see all of the people. It is not an option not to see all of the people. And seeing being sort of a different word than just like line of sight, right? You have to actually see them for who they are. And so that was for me a very eye-opening moment. What, 6 years ago now, maybe. Maybe not quite that long, but probably, yeah, 5 or 6 years ago. So um, yeah, because Arlo was born that year and he is 6. So yeah.
That was the first year of Ed Camp Denver also then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That was a very eye-opening experience for me as well,
Were
because
you in the
and
room? I couldn't
I
remember.
was.
You
I
were there? Okay.
was. Oh,
Yeah.
I was. And actually, I was, because I just remember it. Like I make that kind of laughing noise now because I'm just thinking back to my white fragility and how it was for me in that moment. It was so eye-opening, but where I was at on my journey was I got as far as like the shock and sort of like, oh, what am I supposed what like it just kind of
Right.
was
It was
like
a
so fast and all of a
confrontation in many
sudden.
ways. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, and being that I'm even still currently working on recovering from codependency, like conflict is not my thing. So it was definitely one of the very early experiences that I had. And it also frustrates me that I was already to that point in my life, in my career and professional life, and also as an educator. And a it was such a different experience for me than I had had.
Yeah.
And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
particularly at the time, we were all working in the Imaginarium and in that kind of space of, I think, people who were at least a little bit more focused and tuned into social justice and how matters of education and everything that was sort of like coming together in our urban school systems was playing out in all these different other
Right.
areas. And so, like, even still, I think back and I'm like, God, we missed out on so many good conversations. Like, there were so many brilliant people, so many different experiences, people who had taught in New Orleans, people who had been in places, taught on reservations, like all kinds of different things that if we had talked about it and just really just put it all out there, like, I felt it, and I now can say that we were doing a lot of talking and not a lot of acting on that talk. And I
Right.
think ultimately that's like was sort of how come we ended up continuing our journeys elsewhere. But just such a missed opportunity, and the amount of change we could have then created with the teachers we were working with the kids who we were around, it just would have been, and that much sooner in our lives. Like, if that was 6 years ago, think of how much we could have done. Think about how many implicit bias and like just covert racist maneuvers and things that we could have just completely avoided because we would have known better, but we didn't. We were so early on our journey. And that's, I think, to me, why like we have to have these conversations. Because as a teacher, I wasn't allowed to have them. And that's just the truth.
You weren't allowed to have them?
I was not. I I don't think that people understand the degree to which compliance rules our schools. I
Hmm.
don't, in the same way that people acknowledging their racism can, if they're very early on, create a lot of discomfort and they're
Mm-hmm.
not
Mm-hmm.
willing to say so. I think that when I say that schools are baby prisons, people crawl in their skin and think that I'm a little bit, I have three heads, but I firmly believe it. And I left the public school system and I stopped spending time in schools, and I went back into a school at the beginning of this school year, and the experience that I had in this very white, privileged, brand new, everything shiny school was, oh my gosh, I'm in a prison for
Yeah.
little people. This is not okay. Like, our young people should not be more focused on compliance, fitting in, like, and I've always have been on the, like, we have to stop fitting them into the box kind of
Right.
thing. But it's so much worse than that. You know, people have been not even willing to admit in education the changes that need to be made for innovation, for just getting literally up to date. Let's
Right.
stop,
Right.
like, that doesn't even touch the surface of dismantling the systemic racism, the school to prison pipeline, like all kinds of things that are happening to communities over and over again. And it's frustrating to me that still the conversation is so loud right now. But a lot of these conversations that I've been looking for or having or feeling are really important, I still don't see them happening. And I wonder sometimes, is that because there's so much right now of like, this is the way you do it, and if you don't, you're going to be just publicly shamed, all the things. Like, there is something to be said for not just coming at somebody over and over and over again, particularly if they have said, I'm on this journey now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's the difference of like sides versus spectrum, right? So if you have to pick a side, then there is no middle ground, right? If everything is a spectrum, then you have the ability to move towards, um, a new way of looking at it. And I do think that that's really catching a lot of people up, particularly on social media. Like it is very much you are with us or against us, right? There is almost none of the, um, uh, you know, but uh, the we don't make time and a place for people to do that questioning or to have those, sort of moments of, well, let me probe this a little deeper. Let me think about this because actually that was really, um, that was really scary when, down the road from me, I saw people looting, right? It was really, frightening when I um, found out that, the essentially the whole of the United States, all 50 states, on a single day had, multiple protests, right? That is not something that happens, right? And if you are choosing sides, it's like, well, am I for the protests or am I not? Versus, is there a way to say there is something happening here? I need to figure out where I fit in, how I fit into this broader conversation, into this, broader moment. Um, the last time that I felt like this was not after Trayvon Martin. It was actually Occupy Wall Street. Um, it really does feel, and at that moment, when Occupy was going on, it really did feel like there is a way of interacting in society that is fundamentally different than the way that we are doing it right now, and that change can come from a different way of interacting. Right, change can come from, um, one of my favorite things that came out of Occupy Wall Street was the human microphone, or human loudspeaker, where you would have groups of people who were essentially doing telephone, but who were saying the thing that they were hearing for the people behind them, right? And they were echoing down the line because there are hundreds of people who need to hear this. How do we then get that message further? And so that, as a metaphor, is very much what I would like to see, right? There are people at the front lines who are echoing and calling out, these are the things that are happening here. We need you to amplify, right? And send this on to the next people. And it's going to change slightly, and people are going to talk with their own voices and those kinds of things. But it needs to happen where it gets amplified from the epicenter of a city or where things have occurred, in Minneapolis or things like that, and it has to ripple, but it can't. The message can't change from there to out here. It has to be as much the core message as possible, but everybody has to take their own part and use their own voice to project it. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what I would like to see us start to do.
What what that makes me think of is exactly what happened on Tuesday, on Blackout Tuesday, because the Black Lives Matter hashtag has been, and throughout now, more people paying attention to it, continues to be very, very important. And one of the methods that people are essentially, what is it called? The human loudspeaker?
Yeah, or human microphone. Yeah,
Human microphone. And so I think that that was uh, that was part of the problem, is that that was the way that people were getting information from the ground, that people were getting information from one city to another. Even like in Denver tonight at 6 o'clock, there was a car rally, and the way that it was announced was through social media, and tune in at this time and we'll give you the location. Like, I don't think that people understand the severity of what is happening, and that when people say, "Oh my gosh, we're living fill in the blank TV or movie,"
yeah,
that it's not that far from the truth. Like, if you are a conspiracy theorist or not, that doesn't refute the facts that are now
right,
available to people to see. And so it it is challenging for me sometimes, like you said, like, where are you getting your information from? Because if you are getting all your information from a source who's just like you, then you're
right,
just elevating your own voice. You're just doing it through someone else.
right.
You're,
Yeah, and I think I'm very interested in the way in which we listen and the way in which we amplify. Um, one of my other favorite podcasts essentially just got out of the way this week. So my brother and me, the McElroy Brothers podcast, they said, yeah, we are not going to have anything intelligent or valuable to say on what's going on because this is not our lived experience. So they did a feed drop of the podcast Minority Corner, which is essentially analyzing the news from a black and somewhat queer lens. One of the hosts is a black queer man, and he um, was really able to talk about the murder of George Floyd, the riots, the protests, like in a far more nuanced way than I think folks would allow from other other people, right? The three white men who normally host the podcast, right? Like, and I think for good reason, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. They had this moment where they were rehashing the gaffe that Joe Biden had on a radio show recently, where he was like, "If you're thinking of voting for Donald Trump, you're not black," and which is not a great look for a 77-year-old white man to say. And so they were talking about it, but then they were saying, he might not get to say that because that's not his own lived experience, but he's not wrong in terms of like what is in the best interests of African Americans in the US, right? 4 more years of Donald Trump is not going to be better for the community, right? And so the idea of how do you get out of the way for the people who should be speaking, or how do you get out of the way so that even if you want to say the words and they are true, that you aren't the people like that need to be the ones out in front, right? Nobody needs to hear me, saying what a travesty, uh, you know. And yet, when I was talking with a colleague of mine, she was like, "Yes, but there are people in your network who probably need you to say it to them." And so, how do you do both and, right? How do you do the name of the podcast, right? How do you speak to the people in your network who need to hear it from someone who looks like you, and how do you amplify the voices to the people that are actually the ones who are living the experience? So that's where my head is for sure on this.
Hmm. I think that part of what has been happening is that there is, I think that there's a lot of good intent that's not necessarily, people are not being forced to stop and really think about what they're doing and why they're doing it in the same way that somebody who has lived that experience is going to be able
Right.
to do. And I think that the part of the messaging is, don't just click the button, don't just reshare, don't just do the thing, but like, and I liked how you said it earlier, like if what you want or need right now is to stop and to reflect and then to speak, then that's what you should do.